to the United States or perhaps Canada. And you were somewhat quirky if you went somewhere else. Certainly if you went to a university in the Asia Pacific, that was considered quite unusual. But haven't things changed? That is no longer the case. Whereas I saw my future, my opportunities, bound up. It seems strange now, acting Deputy President, but bound up with Britain or the United States or more broadly Europe. Most young Australians today see their future bound up much more in their region, whether it be China, India or the Asia Pacific more generally. That's an enormous change in just 25 years. The new Colombo Plan heralds a new age of discovery. Much of Australian historical opinion, if not hagiography, commonly credits, I know, Mr Whitlam and Mr Keating with having discovered Asia, but as I like to remind this chamber, Acting Deputy President, not surprisingly, not many people realise that the original pioneers of Australia's rendezvous with our region were Liberal politicians such as Sir Robert Menzies, Sir Paul Hasluck and, of course, later Lord Casey. And their efforts predate the involvement of those two Labor Prime Ministers. The Coalition continues to build on that very important legacy. The new Colombo Plan is another sign that under Australia, under a coalition government, is determined to have a mature, respectful and productive relationship with our neighbours. It's different today, Acting Deputy President. The world is different. In 2013, such a relationship needs to be based on reciprocity and mutuality. For centuries, for about 500 years, Acting Deputy President, since the days of Marco Polo and Vasco da Gama, the West had met the East largely to possess its treasures, initially through trade, then through colonisation. Spices, tea, silk, porcelain, and later rubber, oil and cheap electronics flowed to satisfy the West's appetite for the exotic and subsequently fuel the Industrial Revolution and later mass consumption society. That was the initial relationship between East and West. Where the goods went, people soon followed, Acting Deputy President. Just as hard-working Asian labourers had crossed the oceans to build American railways, extract Australian gold and fill English textile factories, so had the continent's young and ambitious sought the benefits of Western education and Western opportunities, including the tens of thousands who took advantage of Australia's original Colombo Plan and millions who have studied in Australia ever since. But today, this traffic is no longer one way. No longer. The Coalition's new Colombo Plan is animated. And this is a big change, Acting Deputy President. It is animated by the acknowledgement that the playing field has now evened out and that Asia and the West, including Australia, are equal partners in building the future. We can learn from one another and benefit from one another, which is why the key aspect of the relationship is exchange and two-way mobility. No longer is it a matter of the West teaching all to the East. It's now a matter of trading perspectives and learning from each other. As I said before, this is only because we are, as a nation, more comfortable in our own skin, more confident, and therefore more at ease with the world, that we can truly engage with Asia. We have changed so much in just 25 years. The new Colombo Plan aims to lift knowledge of the Asia-Pacific and Australia and strengthen our people-to-people and institutional relationships through study and internships undertaken by Australian undergraduate students in the region. While our country, which is one of the great providers of tertiary education to many countries across the world, in fact, Acting Deputy President, Australia continues to educate more students from overseas per head of population than any other nation on earth. And overall, in terms of sheer numbers, we teach the third most students from overseas in our tertiary institutions right now. And we also do it very, very well. We'll continue to do that But we also want to see our undergraduate students, consider studying overseas for part of their course, becoming familiar with our neighbours' languages and their cultures, and benefiting with work experience opportunities on the ground. As the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, has said, the government wants to see study in the Asia-Pacific region become what she's termed a rite of passage for Australian undergraduate students, and an endeavour that is highly valued right across the Australian community. Funded by $100 million, the New Colombo Plan, Acting Deputy President, will commence in 2015 after a pilot phase in 2014. Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, as well as Hong Kong, are being invited to participate in a pilot phase. The success of this program, Acting Deputy President, will rely on close cooperation between governments, universities and businesses in Australia and throughout the region. The new architecture of these regional agreements can no longer just be government to government. It has to really be now government to government, bureaucrats to bureaucrats, universities to universities, business to business and so forth. Non-government organisations to non-government organisations. It has to be have many, many streams, because governments themselves can't make this work. It will take the cooperation of many. The New Colombo Plan is a good illustration of the coalition government's focus on Asia. As the Prime Minister said during the election campaign, decisions which impact on our national interests will be made in Jakarta, in Beijing, in Tokyo, in Seoul, as much as they will be made in Washington. As Australia continues, and I hope we always will continue, to welcome hundreds of thousands of international students, it's time that the Marco Polos and Vasco da Gamas of our own Generation Y ventured out from our friendly ports and into the wide world, this time not to look for spices and silk, but for knowledge and for work. A few weeks ago, I was lucky enough, Acting Deputy President, to visit Japan, where I spoke to government officials and business leaders about the New Colombo Plan. And I can tell you, they're very excited about it. They like the idea. And they want to see more young Australians in Japan, because they too understand that Japan itself needs to become more open to the world. And as Japan will help Australian students become more Asia-ready, Australian students will help Japan become better prepared to truly embrace the globalised world. The Abe government, you'd be aware, Acting Deputy President, their approach is a much more outward-looking approach for a Japanese government. And that dovetails very nicely with the New Colombo Plan and our idea of sending undergraduate students to Japan. So the Japanese government was particularly enthusiastic about it. And I know that the enthusiasm is equally great in the other three pilot countries, Hong Kong, Singapore and Indonesia. I know from speaking with government officials in other Asia-Pacific countries, they're also very keen to come on board in 2015 and in subsequent years. In three decades, thanks, Acting Deputy President, to the political courage and wisdom of a number of politicians from both sides of politics, Australia went from the verge of becoming the poor white trash of Asia to one of the region's great success stories and a much-desired partner for our neighbours in trade, investment, energy, education, tourism, culture and many other spheres of life, all within about a generation and not much more. I believe that the New Colombo Plan will build on the success we've had in remaking our country and will go towards securing our shared future in the Asia-Pacific. I thought, as this is my first address, my first chance to speak in the 44th Parliament, Acting Deputy President, I would say something positive, because I do believe that it was very much a bipartisan approach in many areas of economic reform over the last 30 years. And there is no doubt that set Australia on a course for growth, sustainable growth, and that is one of the principal reasons why we are now one of the great success stories in the world. And it's not something that any Australian should ever forget. We are a much, much better country than we were in 1980, and that's really a thanks to decisions taken by governments of both stripes, often, I should add, against the public will. But sometimes governments need to lead, and let's just hope the Abbott government can.
Thank you, Senator.